It's a nice rainy day out at the lake. I'm going to read you some Star Trek fan fiction. You ready? Captain's Log 23115. A shuttlecraft on a routine return trip to the Enterprise struck a micrometeorite broadside, shattering and penetrating the outer hull. Fragments entered the shuttlecraft, dispersed, and struck Chekov, ripping his torso into shreds, instantly killing him. Commander Spock and Yeoman, Janice Rand, were rendered unconscious from the explosive decompression until the self-healing hull repaired itself. The craft returned to the Enterprise by remote, and Spock and Rand were rushed to sickbay. "What's your prognosis?" Kirk asked Dr. McCoy. "Rand has pneumothorax, and Spock has abrasions on his back of his head. Neither is life-threatening, and both should be discharged by tomorrow." "That's good news," Kirk replied with a smile. "That's not all," McCoy said, biting his lip. "Spock is 3 inches taller, and Rand, don't get me started on her. She has had a dramatic hormone shift and is like a dog in heat. I don't know what caused either of these changes, but I am deeply concerned for her safety." "Something on the meteorite must have changed them," Kirk said. "They were normal prior to coming in contact with the debris." "No shit, Captain. Maybe you should be a doctor," McCoy said, waving off Kirk like an annoying fly. "No reason to be defensive, Doctor," Kirk said. "Did you ask the computer for a diagnosis?" "I didn't go to 7 years of medical school to be outdone by a mechanical computerized robot. If you don't like my answer, you ask, but don't do it in front of me." "Are you feeling all right, Bones?" Kirk asked. "You seem a bit testy." "Is that your diagnosis? Why don't you get back to the bridge and run the ship instead of giving me medical advice? You and your computer robot diagnostician can go to hell." Kirk slowly stepped away from the doctor and turned to look at Spock, who was lying in bed attached to a blood pressure monitor and an oxygen sensor. Kirk noticed Spock twitch as he approached and then opened his eyes. "Spock, how are you feeling?" Kirk asked. "I seem to be in a state of change," Spock replied as he looked at the ceiling. "I am suffering from a great deal of pain as I adjust." "Adjust to what?" Kirk asked. "I don't know," Spock replied. "How are Chekov and Rand?" Kirk replied, "Rand will make it. Chekov didn't survive." "What happened?" Spock asked. "A micrometeorite struck the shuttlecraft, and part of it broke up and hit Chekov. There was a decompression, and you and Rand passed out. We brought the shuttlecraft in by remote, and the two of you have been here ever since." Spock squeezed his eyes tight and grit his teeth as a wave of pain shot through. "Bones, get over here," Kirk yelled. "Something's wrong with Spock." McCoy ran to Spock's bedside. He read the monitors on the wall above his head. "Nurse, get me a sedative, now!" "No," Spock yelled. "I will manage. I need to be alert." "I've injected you with more painkillers than I feel comfortable, and I don't know what else I can do for you." "I'm sorry, Spock," McCoy said, pleading. "You've done what's expected," Spock replied, with a tremor in his voice. "This will pass." "Doctor," Nurse Chapel yelled from across the room, "Rand is having a seizure." "Phenobarbital, 200 milligrams, IM," McCoy barked at his nurse. McCoy turned again to Spock, who had visibly changed in appearance. He was taller and more bulk. "I'll ask the computer," McCoy said at the end of his rope. He was out of ideas. "Computer, using all available assessments, diagnose patient Spock." The computer blinked and made various noise as it computed the most viable diagnosis. In a high-pitched, monotone voice, the computer stated, "Patient Spock has more likely contracted an infection." "No shit, you infernal computer," McCoy yelled across the room. "I could have figured that out on my own. Be more specific. What kind of infection does he have, and where is he infected?" Blood diagnostics indicate a possible liver infection," the computer replied. "Infective agent unidentifiable." An alarm sounded from Rand's bed as she received an automatic cardioversion shock to her heart for ventricular fibrillation. McCoy looked up and watched her electrocardiogram return to normal. "My God, what is happening?" McCoy asked. Before McCoy could say another word, the doors to sickbay opened, and Chekov stepped through, holding what was left of his chest. Everything from his shoulders to his feet were covered in blood as he left a blood-soaked trail into the hall. Kirk ran over to Chekov, but kept his hands to himself. He could not believe what he was seeing, as most of Chekov's internal organs were missing, along with half of his ribs. Kirk was at a loss for words. McCoy yelled from Spock's bedside, "Get that man into a bed!" and several nurses assisted Chekov to the nearest bed. Chekov was still able to form words, but could not speak because his lungs were shredded and missing. "Help me, Captain," was all Kirk could understand. "Get another doctor in here," McCoy yelled as he approached Chekov. "How in the hell are you still alive?" McCoy asked, exasperated. What kind of an infection could cause any of this? 12 days later, Pavel Chekov has been sedated and placed in cold storage until the Enterprise can get him to a starbase for advanced medical treatment. Yeoman Rand has returned to limited duty, and Spock is back at his science post on the Enterprise bridge under constant watch of Dr. McCoy and Captain Kirk. He is 6 inches taller and 50 pounds more muscle than before. "Captain, we have an alien vessel approaching 500 kilometers off our bow," Spock said, looking into his blue light monitor. "Any indications they see us?" Kirk asked. "They are slowing down," Spock replied. "Reduce speed," Kirk said to Sulu. "Prepare to engage alien vessel." "Yes, sir," Sulu replied. "Spock, any ideas who the alien vessel might be?" Kirk asked. "Vulcans don't speculate," Spock replied, and stood, scraping the roof of the bridge with the top of his head. "I asked for modifications made to my station," Spock said, gritting his teeth. "Altering the bridge isn't something easily done, Spock," Kirk replied. "We may have to get to the starbase before any changes are made." Uhura spoke up. "We're being hailed, Captain." "On the monitor," Kirk replied, and watched the main view screen as an unknown alien appeared. "I am Gorlok, the captain of the merchant ship Ursus. Who, may I ask, am I speaking to?" Gorlok asked. "My name is James T. Kirk, captain of the starship Enterprise." "Starship? Very good," Gorlok replied. "Starships travel on long missions and need to resupply often. Are you in need of any supplies we can offer?" "We are only allowed to purchase from authorized vendors," Kirk replied. "I'm not familiar with your race." Spock stepped down and stood on the floor next to Kirk, where his head had plenty of clearance. He looked upon Gorlok and said, "I am familiar with your race. We go back many centuries." "Vulcan, I see," Gorlok said with dread. "I haven't seen your dirty, filthy kind in years, since I was a child when my parents were murdered and my siblings were placed in a Vulcan prison camp." "What's going on, Spock? Who are these aliens?" Kirk asked. "Gorlok is of the race of beings known as the dog," Spock replied. "They are the rodents of our solar system, picking up filth and selling it to whomever will buy." "And Vulcans are snakes," Gorlok replied. "That is an excellent analogy," Spock said with a grin. "Captain, I advise you to destroy their ship and be on our way." Kirk was shocked by Spock's request. "For what?" Kirk asked. "They didn't do anything to us. They are no threat." "Like an infected flea, you wouldn't think twice killing them all," Spock said. "I apologize for the words of my second-in-command. I have no plan to kill anyone," Kirk said. "And like I said, we are not authorized to make any purchases from you, so we will be on our way." "No," Spock said. "Load photon torpedoes and fire on my command." Sulu turned back and gave a concerned look. "Captain?" "Belay that order," Kirk snapped. "Spock, what's wrong with you?" "Nothing is wrong with me. Fire torpedoes," Spock yelled. Kirk pressed a button on the arm of his command chair. "Bones, get down to the bridge immediately. We have a problem with Spock." Spock turned to face Kirk and reached out to grab him. Before Spock could take Kirk by his neck, Sulu jumped him and pulled him to the ground. Check out this playlist right here.